Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. So happy that you're here. Also happy to have two great guests, Jake Fromm before we're done, Connor Riley on all the news around UGA, and a bunch to get into in addition to that. New information about exactly what it would mean for the SEC if they did go to the 9-game conference schedule. What makes the SEC different than the other leagues? I think it's found within that discussion. Kirby Smart recently sort of poked fun at himself about a certain aspect of his football career. We'll kind of have a little bit of a chuckle at that. But more importantly, Smart giving you some additional insight in kind of the future of one of Georgia's most important, we would say the most important rivalry game. That is coming up. Georgia got a commit yesterday. We'll talk about that. One of the top priorities for the 2026 class, giving us new information about where things stand with him. That is interesting too. But to kick things off here today, there is a concern that we would say probably ranks at the top of the list for UGA for this upcoming season. National media has noticed it as well. But I'm going to try to tell you why I'm perhaps not as worried about this as others say they are. That's what's going to begin us here today. We're glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
If you really look around and just sort of feel the direction the wind's blowing, you really start to notice that the season's starting to feel like it's getting a little bit closer, that these conversations about what Georgia might look like to their teams and around the country, what they might look like, doesn't quite feel so future tense anymore. It feels like it's a little bit more in the present. Now, we still got some weeks to go before fall camp begins and the season actually gets started, but boy, you can sort of start to feel it getting closer. And as we get closer, it is interesting that some of the people kind of outside our bubble are noticing what we've been talking about forever. We have obviously, since this last season ended, talking about concerns for the next Georgia season. It just sort of rolls from one year to the next around here, kind of in a cyclical fashion. And obviously, as we've spoken about these things, one of the things we've spoken about a ton is the Georgia offensive line and the fact that even though a year ago we liked all of the individual players, we would have said, hey, Dylan Fairchild, one of the best in the country. NFL draft proves that. Tate Ratledge, already kind of making a name for himself there in Detroit. We like him individually. You can go through all the draft picks that Georgia had a year ago and say, boy, you like all those guys. They're kind of viewed as pretty lucrative NFL draft capital. Individually, it was all really nice. Collectively, though, it probably didn't add up as a unit to what we thought it would be. We thought that Georgia would have best offensive line in the country and on a very talent-rich team going into 2024. We thought the Georgia offensive line might rank as the best of those position groups. And as you know, that did not really turn out to be true for whatever reason, which we'll get into more in a moment. That just didn't really happen. That has been well documented. That's been well discussed. But as I said, as you get closer to the start of the season, folks kind of far away from DawgNation are noticing what we've been talking about for a very long time. I saw this, CBS kind of now does what ESPN's always done. They'll take their kind of preseason top 25 and they'll come out with these stories that look at sort of various issues or kind of, sort of contrived topics related to all these top 25 teams. We like stuff like this because anything that kind of gives you a little bit of a springboard for a college football conversation, we would say we're, more than fine with all of that. And so, recently, CBS, Brad Crawford was the writer there at CBSSports.com, was looking at the summer agenda for all of its preseason top 25 teams. And for Georgia, what's on the agenda as fall camp looms is figuring out a way to get more out of the offensive line this year. In fact, let me read this to you from CBS Sports just for a moment. So the summer agenda for Georgia, fix uncertainty along the offensive line. Crawford writes that replacing 4 starters up front is substantially easier as one of the elite programs in the sport. But even Kirby Smart has likely lost sleep over his potential too deep at the line of scrimmage. With a first-year starting quarterback and a bevy of new additions, offensively from the portal. It would help Georgia tremendously if play caller Mike Bobo can depend on Monroe Freeling and Ernest Green to be stalwarts at the tackle spots. And that's a short paragraph, but I would say it contains multitudes, starting with what I think is not a throwaway statement. I believe it's a very important thing to consider. When Brad Crawford says, hey, having to replace 4 starters and, kind of get better along the offensive line is easier when you're as talent-rich as Georgia is. Folks, that is such, I think, an important point. Whether Brad Crawford meant it as that or not, I do think it's the kind of thing that we need to strongly consider here. That last year, the Georgia offensive line was a little bit problematic, and it lost a lot of the talent off of that group to the NFL draft. So to the just kind of sort of knee-jerk reaction, sort of base-level assumption, that means that Georgia's even worse off with the offensive line coming into this year than it was a year ago. It's one of the reasons why, maybe Kirby's losing sleep. But if you really gave most teams in America, not just the also-rans, I'm talking about teams that would compete for championships, if you really gave them a chance to swap their group for Georgia when it comes to the offensive line, there are most teams in America that would probably do that. Perhaps not all of them. There are teams, Texas, for instance, building a lot of depth along the offensive line. Georgia may not be the absolute envy of every team in America when it comes to the offensive line, but they're pretty dadgum close, even with the struggles from a year ago and the departures from a year ago. Georgia remains, because of its overall talent level, kind of the envy of America. Nobody has enough offensive linemen, and Georgia probably has more talent waiting in the wings than everybody. Now, obviously, that doesn't guarantee whatever's going to happen here for this upcoming season, but because Georgia is Georgia, it just kind of gives the Dogs more building blocks to play with. I think that's probably an important point to consider on all of this. However, even with that said, CBS writer says Kirby Smart's losing sleep over this kind of stuff. The truth is, I have a little bit of a hard time imagining Kirby Smart sleeping. It's one of those things. I just don't know that Smart's necessarily much of a sleeper as it is. A lot of these hard driving folks, not exactly sleeping till noon. So I would imagine there's probably a lot of things that perhaps keep Kirby Smart up at night or get him waking up very early in the morning or whatever. My guess is that Smart's not the world's greatest sleeper to begin with, if I had to imagine. So yeah, I would say that Kirby Smart probably is losing some sleep over some of this, because I do think, just being a football guy, he knows that for all the topics that people enjoy speaking about with Georgia, what's Gunnar Stockton going to be like at quarterback? What are these sort of new look offensive pieces? Transfer guys like Zachariah Branch, Noah Thomas, incoming freshmen such as C.J. Wiley or Talon Taylor. How do these guys sort of fit into the offense and what that's going to look like? Kirby Smart knows that all of those topics are basically irrelevant if you're not better with your offensive line. So, yeah, I don't think it's a flippant thing to say, hey, Smart's kind of lost some sleep over this. I would imagine that all coaches have some restless nights, and thinking about your lines of scrimmage is perhaps one of the things that does keep you up at night if you are a coach. But here's where I'm going to put a positive spin on this for a moment. And once again, this ties right back directly to something that Brad Crawford from CBS Sports said a moment ago. So a lot of this hinges on two guys. Hinges on Ernest Green coming back from injury to be one of your stalwart offensive tackles, and it sort of hinges on Monroe Freeling shaking off injury, and frankly, as he even himself would say, not a great game against Notre Dame, sort of shaking all that off and being a bookend on the other side. Green and Freeling, if they can be good offensive tackles, then that goes a long way towards giving Mike Bobo what he needs to sort of produce the offensive improvement that Georgia needs. Well, here's where I'm going to tell you, if that really is the hinge point for Georgia, Green and Freeling, then I feel very good about the situation, because I'm here to tell you right now that I have not sold 1 ounce of stock I own, figuratively speaking, in either Ernest Green or Monroe Freeling. I like these guys. And I'll remind you that we played the clip, what was it, a couple months ago or so, or a few weeks ago, however long it was, of Cole Kubelik, the SEC network analyst who loves offensive line play, a part of the Joe Moore Award. And on his podcast, he said he thought the Georgia offensive line would be the best offensive line in the SEC, specifically citing Green and Freeling as part of the reason why, saying for Ernest Green, who a year ago was more injured than we kind of knew during the season, that's been since revealed, that even with that, he has seen, as Cole said, elite on tape when it comes from Green. But even if someone like Cole Kublik, who knows the offensive line spots more than I do, even if he's not saying that, I still like both Green and Freeling and still feel much better about Georgia this year if it's these kinds of guys, these kinds of players, frankly, these kinds of personalities who are going to be heavily dependent on. Because I think there's something really impressive about both guys, their mental makeup to go along with their physical makeup. And I spent some time, I guess late last night, early this morning, thinking about both these guys because I knew I wanted to talk about this CBS story. And I went back and kind of listened to what both guys said during the spring. And in their own way, about their personal situation and the situation for the Georgia offensive line, it just seems like both these guys just sort of get it. Let me start with Ernest Green, who, when he spoke to reporters during spring practice, as you would imagine he would, he was asked about the struggles from a year ago. And while he doesn't make any apologies for those struggles, at the same time, back during spring practice, it also sounded like Ernest was very much looking to turn the page and get ready for the upcoming season and focus more on where they want to get better and improve. I thought this was really good. Now, Ernest is not the most, I guess, outspoken guy necessarily. He's not the most, dramatic speaker. But boy, these words carry a lot of weight. Listen to Ernest Green from back in spring practice.
Well, I'm a firm believer, and you can't really dwell on the past for us to fully be able to live in the future. So I don't see what reassessing anything we did last year would help any of the guys we have moving in the O-line room this year. So, we're really just trying to, like I said, focus on making everybody better. That includes myself, everybody in the room, starting with Coach Searles all the way down. Everybody has to get better and really just try to fulfill their max potentials every day, and that's all you can ask for.
I mean, listen, I really like that perspective of, last year wasn't great, but we're thinking about this year, and you get the impression they do take that really seriously. I thought when Monroe Freeling had his turn with the reporters, he was also really good too. Kind of asked a similar question of, you got all these guys win the NFL draft, a lot of good players here individually, as we've said over and over again. We like a lot of these guys. We like them all. But collectively didn't quite add up to what it was supposed to be. And during spring practice, Monroe Freeling kind of had his own interesting insight into that. This is what Monroe said at the time.
I think it really just came back on us and our execution. I think that sometimes we were, more worried about like not failing than succeeding, and I think we thought we were more just senior heavy, so I think we thought we were there, but I really think that we should have focused more on our fundamentals.
But when you listen to him speak, he says that's very much what their work is working and focusing in on right now. And that, as Freeling said during the spring, a lot of these guys who are stepping in, they haven't tasted the championship success that older Georgia players, such as, like, say, Micah Morris, have, and they kind of want one of those moments for their own. In other words, both Freeling and Green seem to be very serious, based on their public comments, about the kind of improvement they individually need to show and the leverage that might provide for the Georgia offensive line to show the improvement it needs, and then the Georgia offense kind of follows in line behind that. Nothing's guaranteed, and if Kirby really is losing sleep over the offensive line, you can understand why he would be. But if your success depends on a couple of guys like Freeling and Green, who every indication we have are these are good dudes who are still, I think, potentially very good football players, and honestly, maybe Georgia doesn't have quite as much to worry about as we think, because the potential that exists with both these guys, I would say, is still pretty gigantic, and I'm still very big fans of both of them, and I'm expecting big seasons from them here in 2025. Now, just briefly, let me shift gears to this just for a moment. Recruiting roundup here with a couple of pieces of interesting recruiting news. I thought of yesterday at DawgNation.com, fantastic stuff with our Jeff Sintel speaking to five-star tight end Caden Prothrow, fresh off Prothrow's official visit to Georgia, calling it a grade A visit. And obviously this becomes more important. It was, listen, and in the entire time we've been kind of fixated on Mark Bowman, pre-Bowman's USC commitment, we've also been pretty fixated on Caden Prothro too. We've never tried to shortchange Prothro at the, while hyping up Bowman. We've always been big believers in Prothro, but it is also true. At one point in time, it's like, hey, can you add Bowman and Prothro to go along with the tight end commit you already have? But now that Bowman's off the market, obviously Caden Prothro becomes even more important for Georgia right now. And in that story with Jeff Santel at DawgNation.com, Prothro is obviously very well aware of what's going on with Bowman, all of this playing out while, Prothro was essentially in Athens. I want to read this quote to you, what he had to say about all of this. Jeff asking him, does Bowman's commitment to USC affect the way that you feel now about your opportunity at Georgia? He says, no, not really. I figured it was going to be between Texas and Georgia for Bowman, but I didn't think USC was in it. But now since he's committed there, I'm basically now the top guy at Georgia. They want me, and they are recruiting me hard. So the takeaway I think you have there for that is that certainly Prothro feels like he is a top priority for Georgia. Georgia doing a great job of demonstrating that during the official visit. This is a very good story from Jeff Santel at DawgNation.com. Features lots of quotes from Caden. Caden's dad also weighs in on this too. And, frankly, we've seen Prothro a lot. Obviously, a very good program, state championship level program at Bowdoin. We've seen Prothro show out for them. And, Mark Bowman got the attention he did for a reason, very polished prospect. But the ceiling for Prothro is really, really high. So the fact that Georgia still has a chance to win with a player of this magnitude, we think is really important. Also, speaking of Bowman, Bowman from Mater Dei High School out in Santa Ana, California. Georgia yesterday went back to Mater Dei for its first commitment of the class of 2027. I won't pretend to know a lot about the young man here, but I do want to give him some publicity just for a moment. Gavin, is it Honor? Is that what we're going to say here? Gavin Honor has committed to Georgia. He's 5'10", 175 pounds, so not the biggest guy, but very, very speedy, kind of world-class speed almost, choosing Georgia over Texas, Tennessee, and Arkansas. The quote from Hayes Fawcett on 3 from Honor is, God's plan, go Dawg. So Mater Dei, one of the most talent-rich programs in America, Georgia going back there here for its first 2027 wide receiver commit, or first 2027 commit overall. So Georgia doing big work here for the class of 2026 and big work for the class of 2027. The point is, for Georgia, the recruiting grind never stops. We are deep in the middle of it for the class of 2026, but Georgia also looking ahead too. So we expect a whole lot more recruiting news coming in the days ahead. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're happy you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, it's 10 a.m. across all platforms. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just happy you are here. And very thankful to our friends at ServPro, who also make it all possible for you. ServPro also exists for you in a time in which you kind of find yourself really in need. Think about the property that you own, whether it's the house that you live in. Some of you have commercial property. You have a business that's housed in, like, say, a warehouse or something like that. A lot of you own rental property. You depend on that for passive income. That may be kind of what your retirement's based on. There's all kinds of stories out there when it comes to that. And you also know that there are lots of things that can do big damage to your property. It just happens, a tree falls on the roof, something like that. Or sometimes even worse than that, it's fire, it's water intrusion. We hear stories about tornadoes and hurricanes. There's all kinds of things that can create huge damage at wherever it is that you might be living, or whatever property you own that you depend on for something else. And when you have a mess like this to be cleaned up, it's important that you trust the restoration specialists at ServPro to get your property back to its previous condition, to get it looking like it never even happened. That is what ServPro is all about. Each franchise also independently owned and operated as well. And the reason why I think that matters to me is because when someone has a ServPro franchise, this is their business. This is the source of their own personal livelihood. So just like you seek a positive resolution to your kind of messy situation that caused you to call ServPro to begin with, well, they seek the same resolution because they want the word of mouth. They want the success. They want to be able to tell people, hey, we are capable of solving these problems. They're going to be in it with you. They're going to get their hands dirty. They're going to roll their sleeves up. they're going to have skin in the game of getting you to a positive resolution because that is their business. That's what our friends at ServPro are all about. So I want you to find them online. It's servpro.com, SERV, servpro.com, SERV, servpro.com. Fire damage, water intrusion, weather-related catastrophe, anything in between. Our folks from ServPro want to help you get your property back to its previous condition, getting it back looking like it never even happened. So find them online, servpro.com, for a lot more on that today. All right, Tuesdays are always a lot of fun for us. It's Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback, coming up a little bit later on. Also, as the push continues for perhaps a college football playoff field that not the automatic qualifiers, maybe a little bit more space for the SEC to get more than 4 teams in, the push to the SEC to expand to a 9-game conference schedule. We've got new details from a data standpoint about exactly what that would mean if the SEC does make that change. This will be interesting later on, and I think this kind of once again highlights the difference between the SEC and the other leagues. We'll get to that here coming up in a little bit. But prior to that, though, we'll go around the doghouse here for a moment, and I'm going to play a clip here. And this is both, in one case, I guess, somewhat newsy. I think it sheds new light on stuff. In another case, it's also kind of funny. I guess this is going back to SEC spring meetings the other day. Kirby Smart was on the Sirius XM radio show SEC this morning. That's Peter Burns and Chris Doering. And the subject came up, obviously, Doering, one of the hosts, former Florida Gator, about the Georgia-Florida game in 2026 and 2027 taking place in both Atlanta and Tampa over the course of those 2 years. There's been previous reporting from the Athens Banner-Herald that the payout for those 2 neutral site games away from Jacksonville is going to be like $7.5 million per year. And then when the game shifts back to Jacksonville in the newly renovated stadium, the payout from Jacksonville moving forward is going to be like $10 million a year. This is gigantic money, obviously coming Georgia's way, and it kind of quiets down what has been a hot topic for a long time, which is, not just some Georgia fans' wish, but Kirby Smart, his previously stated wish that the Georgia and Florida game could be played in Athens and then rotating to Gainesville in those other years. This could be a home and home. That's something that Kirby Smart has said that he's wanted. And he even said that he would like to have done that even for the 2 one-off years in 2026 and 2027. This turned into a little bit of a joking exchange with Kirby and the 2 hosts, worth playing for you right now. This is the SEC This Morning show, Sirius XM Radio, Peter Burns and Chris Doering, Kirby Smart on the near-term future for both Georgia and Florida, and kind of a humorous look back at his own, I guess, sort of troubled history in this rivalry.
Why can't we play that Florida-Georgia game?
Home and home, like
didn't get it.
I know. Why were you involved in that discussion?
Not in the
much?
decision making. That was an AD decision, that ultimately came based on money, and the Mercedes and Tampa both ponied up and made really good financial offers.
Both teams get payouts on that, as
Which
opposed
right now,
to just one after the other year.
I will say this though, that is one of my to be able to say I was on one of those Florida and Georgia teams that played in Jacksonville, Gainesville, and Athens.
The difference is I get to say that too. But I was on the other side. The other side. I still tell the story. I might have told it last year. Spurs always coming over to me talking. And he's like, "Yeah, I set the record for scoring points." And he whatever it was, 52. Yeah. Well, everybody forgets that was 7 kickoffs. Guess who the kickoff return guy for Georgia was that year? You're looking at him. 7 kickoff returns in one game and brought them all out. And the headline picture after the game, it was 10 guys form tackling me at once on kickoff. Because at the point we kicked off the 7th time, nobody was blocking. And so it was like, boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, I had 7 kickoff returns. I broke a record. That means you're really bad on defense.
That is so funny. First of all, there's a lot to me that's funny about that. Part of it is, and by the way, great insertion of the picture of Kirby Smart. Now, listen, that's not a happy memory for many of us. And I'll tell you this right now. I could talk about this for 2 hours. But so that Georgia-Florida game in 95 that Smart's referencing, that was the same day the Braves won the World Series. A lot of y'all remember, if you're as old as me, you remember that. And I've been waiting for, for a very young man, it felt like forever to see the Braves win a World Series finally happen. Yet the whole thing felt somewhat subdued because Georgia had gotten beat so bad by Florida earlier that day. Now, Florida's a huge favorite in the game, so it wasn't a huge surprise that they'd won so bad, but it still didn't feel good to see that game play out the way that it did. It's easier to laugh about it now because obviously Georgia's gotten its revenge tenfold, but it did not feel good at the time. The other thing is you get this version of Kirby for like 2 weeks out of the year, there's this like really kind of fun window where Kirby's playing some golf, he's going to the beach. Everybody's going to have some downtime. Everybody's going to have a little bit of a relaxed posture. And kind of pre-June, June becomes this major recruiting month. Pre-June, you kind of get a little bit of that from Kirby. So he's far more relaxed than he is any other time of year. I sort of think that's fun. He's even kind of joking when he says they got outbid for the Georgia-Florida game. If you are watching, if you kind of listen, there's a little bit of a sarcastic deadpan to that. He's not complaining. He's sort of joking because, honestly, money's the name of the game. And the fact that Georgia is getting this much money from a couple neutral sites in Atlanta, Tampa, and then in perpetuity in Jacksonville, this sort of starts to feel like a real weapon here. And at one point in time, I think Kirby would have thought was a disadvantage for his program. More than happy to say that it was. Given the money that's at stake now and how much money matters in college athletics moving forward, I don't see how you can think of this as anything other than a real weapon in your arsenal to know you've got these kind of dollars coming in for a neutral site game. So really strong negotiation on the part of Georgia. Obviously, Florida benefits from it too, but a lot of money coming into the program in the very near future. Kirby Smart certainly joking about that plenty there. And that is around the doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. So let me remind you here, we got a couple of big things coming up before we're done. Jake Fromm, great conversation coming up with him. Also, a little bit of a deeper look at what exactly would it mean if the SEC went to the 9-game conference schedule, the way that others have said they want them to, and how would that impact the future of the college football playoff? We'll give you that here today there as well. There's new information about that. But for now, on everything going on with Georgia, always a great Tuesday conversation. Let's speak to Connor Riley here right now, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I think Connor Riley understands the point I was probably making a moment ago, because obviously he sees the on-the-job version of Kirby Smart for the other kind of 11 months out of the year. Like, the idea that Kirby would ever come to a press conference and smile is just such a foreign concept. Joke, he certainly even joke about his own college career. If the media contingent in Athens asks him about his playing career, he'll make it sound like he doesn't remember one iota of his college career. Does it all the time. But for this like really small window, kind of from like, you say Mother's Day to Memorial Day, there's like a relaxed version of Kirby that you get no other time of year. I find that to be, I don't know, kind of charming or something. I'm just glad to know that he's able to get some downtime. I find that to be kind of funny, Connor.
Yeah, this is the Kirby Smart that we hear about behind closed doors when he's talking to recruits and making the pitch and charming everyone. And most of the time when we get him, it's, Tuesday after a practice when he's just come off the field and just doesn't want to really see us. And I can't blame him in that regard. Or, after a game on Saturday where it seems like he can't recall a play that happened in the second quarter, but yet you hear something like that and he's able to rattle it off. And that's just part of the job of being a college football coach. You don't need to employ a friendly relationship with the media, but it's nice to see Kirby in that sort of mood, and I think he gives us better content when he is in sort of that willingness and openness to talk. Though obviously that does not require him to be that as Georgia's head football coach.
I want to ask about the Georgia-Florida situation here for a moment because, as I've said, the fact that they are due to get so much money, there's been previous reporting about how much, I think it starts to feel like a real weapon for Georgia in a day in which programs are just trying to find every dollar they can. This is a lot of money. I'm talking about eye-popping figures coming into the Georgia program. But I think it's also interesting, and Chris Delconte, the Texas AD, spoke about this the other day related to his own neutral site rivalry, Texas and Oklahoma, that takes place every year. Kind of speaking past the sale, I would say. One of the reasons why he likes the 9-game conference schedule, these are his words, is because, hey, we've got the neutral site game, so therefore we can play the neutral site game. We can have 4 home games and 4 road games. That's a nice, neat schedule as far as he's concerned. But as Georgia knows from the past, that's not always the way that some of the scheduling stuff goes with your neutral site game. I mean, I think it's the point I'm getting to, Connor, is it would be a huge win for Georgia if for Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia, Florida, who do have these regularly scheduled neutral site games, if it is like 4-4-1 every year, Connor, that's a pretty good deal. And I think you and I maybe have spoken about this before, that it's not likely that Georgia often gets the sort of cozy treatment from the SEC. But if Texas wants it too, it seems like at that point in time, maybe it does open the door for Georgia. If they really can go to 9 games and the neutral site will sort of always be the one-off with the 4 home games, 4 road games. That's the kind of thing that makes you wonder, will every SEC team now be looking to copy that? Because Georgia's getting the benefit of, never having to play, the odd number of road games, getting the extra financial benefit from the neutral site game. That could be a real win-win for Georgia if they do allow that as a league.
Yeah, and look, you and I, as someone who have been in the trenches on the Georgia-Florida debate and remaining in Jacksonville, they've thrown so much money at this. Like, as much as you might want to see that, and as much as, from a fan atmosphere, you might want that, Georgia's going to get $9 million plus its travel expenses covered for them to play that game in Atlanta next year. Like, that's just so much money to be thrown for just one game. That's more than you're getting from a non-conference game. I think Tech has an agreement with Mercedes-Benz Stadium where over the course of like 6 games, they get $10 million. So for them to get that kind of money for just one game, it unfortunately, I think for the fans that want to see this game played in Athens and in Gainesville, it just makes it a non-starter. But yeah, I'm doing a series this week on Georgia's schedule and the way things look in that regard. And, I stumbled across, the number of opponents that Georgia has to play where they have a bye week before they play Georgia. Unsurprisingly, Georgia is tied for the most in the conference with 4. Conversely, you want to guess who might be the team that has the fewest. It's not Texas, though Texas does get a bye before playing Georgia. It's Oklahoma with 0 such games. So, look, the way things have gone with the schedule of late, and yes, I think you're right to look at, hey, if Georgia can have a neat 4-4-1, that'd be pretty nice and beneficial for them. Yes, there would be years they'd be missing out on a 5th home game, but also there are years like last year where you only get 3 SEC home games and you have that uneven split. So I think going forward, Georgia is in a position now to leverage this Georgia-Florida rivalry in Jacksonville. One of the most important games in the SEC every year. There's a reason they announce a game time for it months in advance because they want this game to always be played at 3:30 like it should be. And so leveraging this rivalry is something that I think has helped Georgia, not just in regards to this Georgia-Florida game, which Georgia has dominated of late. I'm sure you'll get to the Gator hater updater later in the show.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also something that helps it within the SEC as well.
So I want to talk to you about the Mark Bowman situation for a second. And look, there is a very sort of sour grapes-ish tone to some of this, which I don't necessarily mean, but it just going to kind of come shining through. If the rumors that I've heard are true, and I have every reason to believe they are, the money that USC has paid for Bowman is ridiculous. It's like sort of nonsensical monopoly money for a team that's like it's not like he's the missing piece to a national championship. This is just a thing they've done because they didn't want him to go to Georgia, which I realize totally sounds like sour grapes. I mean, I like there's a part of this you can't really escape. I think there's a reaction I'm hearing from some Georgia fans, which is, well, somebody needs to do something about this. Like the sort of the Deloitte house settlement stuff, which I guess has been now pushed back again. I'm so confused by all that. Has been pushed back again. It's supposed to sort of limit these NIL deals to fair market. I think there's some maybe belief even internally for Georgia that, hey, we can't make promises that we're not sure are going to stand up. Smart did speak the other day, but the possibility of contracts being voided, I think this is the perfect example of what at least might theoretically be true on that. And yet I'm not quite so confident that anybody, like I feel a lot more confident that somebody can quote unquote do something about the transfer portal more they can do something about NIL. And it certainly sounds like the SEC, even Tennessee, sort of united around, we're going to play by the rules. We're going to try to do fair market NIL at least above the board here. We're going to do fair market NIL. But it certainly doesn't sound like the non-SEC schools are quite as excited about playing by those same rules. What do you make about all the stuff that sort of played out in this Bowman situation and what it perhaps suggests about what may or may not be coming next?
Yeah, so a couple different things here. One, like the idea that Mark Bowman's going to put USC over the top. He is not the first 5-star tight end that USC has landed. There was a few years ago, actually, USC went head-to-head and won a commitment for a 5-star tight end. He signed with them. That's Deuce Robinson. BA, do you know where Deuce Robinson's playing his football this fall?
I know he transferred out of USC, but I don't remember where he went.
He's going to be playing for Florida State, which is not USC, right. Most importantly there. So, if you want to blow your load on a 5-star tight end, even someone who has been compared to Brock Bowers, That's fine. And I recognize this might come off as sour grapes, but my larger takeaway from the Bowman recruitment, and this is going in a couple different directions now. Like, this sucks for college football as a whole. Not even, because of the laughable amounts of money that are being thrown around, but this Bowman recruitment was being set up for a while here as a Georgia-Texas battle, something, and we saw a lot of these in recent years, not necessarily Georgia-Texas, but you think these big-time recruits where you're going to go head-to-head with another school. Some of them you're going to win, some of them you're going to lose. But the ones that you win, those players resonate with you in a way and with the fan base where, okay, I've been following this recruitment for months. I now get to follow his career at the University of Georgia. And that builds in a lot of clout. It builds in a lot of fan service to sort of help the sport along. And with the way these recruitments go this day and age, like, that's gone, where these things turn so quickly at the 11th hour, especially this far out in advance, where you think Jackson Cantwell, you think Justice Terry, and those are Georgia examples. And Georgia's been on the other end of this as well, where they've been able to win those types of recruitments as well. But just as a general college football fan, when we have things like this, where the highest bidder comes in with a laughable offer, because there are going to be schools in each and every cycle that are able to do that at certain positions, this hurts college football as a whole. It hurts the building up of players and of prospects. Like, you think back, and KJ Bolden could very well be the last one of these, because he was the one that came to mind last night. He has his big recruitment in the 2024 recruiting cycle, first commits to Florida State. Then we're following the melodrama of recruiting. And I know not everybody likes that, but I am someone that enjoys following recruiting and enjoys covering that process. You hear, oh, it's Florida State, it's Auburn, it's Georgia. It's a big win for Georgia when they're able to flip him on signing day. And I know Auburn wasn't necessarily thrilled about that, the way that turned out. But, you think about what that means for KJ Bolden's career. It brings him in as a fan, as somebody that fans know, and we're able to follow his development. And he has a very good first year. And I think a lot of people are excited of what that might be going forward. In this day and age, where you're able to buy recruits that quickly, which is what happened with Mark Bowman. Let's not kid ourselves here. Like, that star-making machine, lever, whatever you want to call it, is just gone. And I think that hurts college football as a whole. And so, because it's not just like yes, USC fans know about this, but when you're these big-time recruitments, a lot of casual college football fans end up following those as well. And I think Mark Bowman would have been that. And so that is just completely gone now. And Mark Bowman, the discussion of him is in a totally different realm in that regard. And so, we'll continue to see these. I do think the transfer portal is going to impact some of this. And I do think eventually they're going to get that cleaned up. But until this House settlement gets settled, and who knows when that does, as you mentioned last night, there was an extension granted. Judge Claudia Wilkins signed off on that extension pretty quickly. She has not signed off on the final approval for the House settlement yet. And I just think that this is another example of the money that has come into the sport and everything that has gone along with it has made things worse for the way that we used to love and celebrate college football. You think back to I think one of the great moments in DawgNation history is when Georgia was able to land George Pickens on signing day. And look, maybe similarly, that was a late flip that sort of came out of nowhere. But we've been talking about George Pickens for quite a while. That's gone nowadays. And that's something that gets settled and taken care of in May. And they try to buy these kids off so that they're not taking visits elsewhere, which is something that I think played into USC making this offer when they did. And that's just, as someone who loves the sport of college football and loves following recruiting, it's just a bummer that is the day and age we live in. And the Mark Bowman recruitment is just another example of that.
So to me, it seems like, and I've tried to talk about this, even though I'm not a lawyer, I'm not smart enough to necessarily know, but I would say that based on some of Kirby Smart's public comments, I would say that he's putting more hope and faith into the House settlement than I believe the actual ramifications of that settlement deserves. Like, Kirby has used the word cap a lot in the offseason. I think that's wishful thinking. I think when the House settlement is finally, given to us by this judge, it's just going to be a sheet of paper. And a sheet of paper doesn't have the power to stop anything. Claudia Wilkins may be a judge. There is no enforcement arm to go along with whatever decision she makes. So she can render a legal opinion, and people can say, that's nice, we appreciate you weighing in. We're just going to keep doing what we've always been doing and dare somebody to stop us. And I just sort of think that's what's going to happen here, that for all of this talk of, we're going to have the settlement and it's going to be rendered final and we're going to have a cap, I think that's quaint and sort of, wholesome to imagine. I just don't think that's going to be the ultimate result of all of this. I do think Miami, Oregon, USC, programs like that, probably Texas, even though Texas, I guess, is, at least right now saying they're going to sign on with the rest of the SEC to follow these rules. I don't think these bigger programs outside the SEC, I don't think they have any interest in following these rules, and I just don't think they're going to.
Criminals are always going to be one step ahead of the cops, and that's just sort of the way that I envision this house settlement playing out. Look, we live in a society that loves to find loopholes, and believe me, there are going to be people out there, very smart people, very well-paid people, that are going to look for loopholes and exploit inefficiencies in trying to figure out ways around this cap, as Kirby Smart calls it, and everything that comes with the house settlement. And look, if you're Georgia, you kind of have to play by those rules too. You have to know that, and look, college football is incredibly competitive. College athletics as a whole, it's incredibly competitive. Kirby Smart's making over, I think over 8 figures because of the way that he's able to find the smallest advantages. And you're going to see that continue to happen regardless of what comes from this house settlement here. It is not, in my opinion, going to be like an NFL style where you get a true hard cap in there and there's a limit on what you can spend and you're trying to find ways to maneuver around that. It's not going to come down to talent evaluation and nailing that. It's just going to be able to come down to who is able to best make use of the funds that they are both given and the ones that they have on hand. We have seen that programs like Miami, programs like Oregon have been able to leverage that cash flow into making, in theory, a better football program. Now, Miami has still never made the college football playoff. Miami has still made one appearance in the ACC championship game, and they got boat raced by Clemson in that appearance. So, they're going to try and spend around that, but I do think, and I would give Kirby Smart the benefit of the doubt here, he's still going to be able to find ways to field and to have a very successful Georgia football team. Is it going to be the highest spending every year? I'd be shocked if that were the case because I know that Kirby Smart doesn't believe in doing that. And that's just sort of the world that Georgia is going to have to live in. They're going to have to try and win by their rules and win on their terms, knowing that there are going to be other programs out there in college football that are trying to do it differently and trying to do it with more money.
Connor, great stuff. Super interesting. We appreciate your time here today on DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. As you mentioned, you've got some great stories up at DawgNation.com right now. I look forward to reading them all. I hope the rest of our audience will too. And we'll speak to you again here in the very near future.
Yep, and as always, it's a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, to me, that's what the real drama in the House settlement's all about, which is, okay, once the verdict is sort of rendered, so to speak, is anybody going to really follow it? And I sort of suspect that they won't. Although maybe that's just an overly pessimistic viewpoint. That I think that the SEC's wish on this, that somehow the toothpaste gets put back in the tube with this sort of outlandish spending, and it is, I would say, to a degree, outlandish, sort of nonsensical. I just don't quite think we're going to get there, but we'll see. We're going to find out a lot in the very near future. For now, though, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And we're coming up on some really important milestones when it comes to Star of the Seas, the brand new and the Icon class of ship. It's going to be at Port Canaveral by this August. That's when it's going to start sailing. I'm hopeful to be among the first to get a chance to be on that so I can come back and tell all of you about it. I really am legitimately very excited about it. But right now, we got like an 11-day period coming up where they're kind of testing all the stuff for Star of the Seas in some trials there in Turku, Finland, where it's been constructed. These shipyards are amazing to me, where like these ships get built. It's just amazing that something so large actually is going to be, constructed by humans and kind of put together there. That's all happening here right now. You got, it's like 2,000 experts are kind of testing all the stuff. And remember, there's a lot of stuff within the interior of Star of the Seas we don't yet know about, right? We know about some of the things that it's going to have. We have some, for those of us who care about stuff like this, a lot of rumors out there about what might be going on. But we don't have a ton of that overall. There's still some surprises, they get to be discovered. So these folks in Finland right now are getting a chance to see all of this. And then we'll all get our chance to see it when it eventually kind of sails across the Atlantic and makes its way to Port Canaveral, where it'll start taking care of passengers coming up this August. Really exciting stuff with Star of the Seas. And Jessica Slater is an awesome travel advisor, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. She can tell you all about your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation needs, including, of course, Star of the Seas. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her Jay Slater at dreamvacations.com. So we talked a moment ago with Connor Riley about issues related to NIL and stuff like that. We've also got kind of ongoing issues with the CFP too. We talked yesterday about the fact that Georgia, along with Alabama, kind of among those making the strongest push not to go to the playoff format. That would include 4 automatic qualifiers, require the play-in games to see from the SEC who would make the college football playoff. I think it's been believed. I think that Josh Brooks has kind of given voice to this, and Kirby Smart's done a pretty good job of expressing some skepticism about that perhaps you shortchange the SEC by only limiting it to 4 SEC teams in the college football playoff in the automatic qualifier situation. That I think the SEC would like to have, basically like 16, team playoff where it's all, kind of up for grabs. There are no automatic qualifiers for conference champions or anything like that. Probably won't get that, but it does seem like a compromise might be going to something more like, say, a 5 and 11. 5 automatic qualifiers for the top 5 highest rated conference champions in college football, and then 11, kind of at-large bids after that, which in a lot of years could work out to the SEC's favor. Not all years, perhaps not last year, but in a lot of years it could. Now, we've also heard some reporting out there, well, if you go to that, there's a bunch of whining coming out of the Big Ten. They say, we want you to go to a 9-game conference schedule if we're going to agree to this sort of 5-11 model. And right now there's a lot of pushback in the sort of Big Ten-friendly media sphere about the so-called 5-11 model. We want you to go to a 9-game conference schedule if we're going to do this. Well, Bill Connelly, who's been one of the kind of lone voices in the wilderness in support of the SEC strength of schedule, so many media people seemingly choosing to ignore this, Connelly had some interesting data about what it would look like if the SEC really did adopt the 9th conference game, essentially by playing another SEC team, theoretically playing a much tougher opponent than you would play in a non-conference game, including a Power 4 non-conference opponent. Let me show you this on the screen for a moment. What Connelly wrote on X the other day, and he also wrote a story about this at ESPN.com, he said he did the math. He says the difference in an 8-game schedule and a 9-game schedule isn't insignificant. He said it'd be 1.5 fewer 9-win teams per year and also 2 fewer bowl teams. He says they should do it anyway because it'd be fun and also because of money. But Connelly kind of laying out some important details there of if you do go to this 9-game conference schedule, you're going to have fewer playoff-worthy teams based on the current obsession with win-loss record. And at the bottom end, you're going to have a couple of less bowl teams, which, let's face it, means more and more coaches losing their job, which is ultimately what this is all about. So I think that's kind of an interesting kind of look into what I guess the current landscape is for why the SEC is so particular about whatever kind of playoff format does get adopted, because they're impacted by this more so than anybody else. In fact, let me bring on my next guest to sort of talk more about this here a little bit. We love it every week. We get to do a Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm. That's always a lot of fun. Jake's always got such great insight into everything happening around college football. So let's speak to him right now as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. Jake, I think this is one of those things that sort of never gets solved, but what the future of the college football playoff could look like. You and I have spoken about this before. It does seem like there's growing, I guess, agreement or maybe tolerance for, is a better word, the 5-11 model where you'd have the 5 highest ranked conference champions and then 11 at-large teams, which I think the SEC is starting to look at a little bit more favorably because in some years they could get more than, like, say, 4 playoff teams. It might work out to their advantage. But as the math guy from ESPN kind of just crunches, hey, the SEC is just impacted by this kind of stuff more than the other leagues because there are more, I would say, playoff-level teams in the SEC. So, a long way, sort of winded way to sort of set you up for a question here, which is last week we heard Josh Brooks, Greg Sankey, some of the key figures around the SEC sort of step up and say, we want a playoff format that benefits us. At the very least, I am happy now to see the SEC a little bit more willing to argue on its own behalf than maybe I think it was a year ago, where it was, I think, playing a little too nice. I'm kind of glad to see the SEC sort of fighting for its own best interest here. Is that something that you agree with?
Yeah, I'm kind of on both sides of the fence here. I like the SEC kind of being aggressive, so to speak, in their own interest. I think it is a fantastic job of becoming just such a good football conference, of having a high level and such a good product. But I'm also kind of a purist in the sense I don't care. I just want the 16 best teams in the playoff. To me, the 5-11 model is a plan B kind of second option to me, and in my eyes, I just want the 16 best teams. I don't care. Obviously, I think the 16 best and the 5-11 are very similar because if you're a conference champion, odds are you're going to be pretty good. Now you kind of start getting into the other conferences. Are they really maybe as good as a fringe SEC third or fourth team there? I don't know. I think that's why we play the games. I think the regular season is very important. I don't like these play-in games and these opportunities. I think you could also shortchange the SEC in some years, just like you mentioned. And also, I think you diminish and a slightly different product than the NFL is because every single week matters in college football. And I'd like to keep it that way.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what the SEC is trying to preserve here is, if you go back and look a year ago, the Big Ten got 4 playoff teams. But the team those playoff teams had to beat to make the playoff was not necessarily playoff worthy. It was a bowl team, may have even been a top 25 team. Think about Illinois, for instance. But it wasn't necessarily a playoff level team. Whereas in the SEC, so Tennessee makes the playoff, Alabama doesn't. Tennessee goes 10-2, Alabama goes 9-3. But if that result had been flip-flopped, Alabama would have been 10-2, they would have made the playoff, and Tennessee would have stayed home. In other words, to make the playoff, Tennessee had to beat another playoff-level team. Same thing for, like, say, Georgia, who, they beat Texas, a playoff-level team. That was what kind of got them into the playoff. If they lose that game, they don't make it, and a different team perhaps would have gone. That the level of depth in the SEC is, okay, well, we've got teams in this new 12-team world that make it, but the teams just below that are kind of indistinguishable from a quality standpoint. It's just the head-to-head result that kind of kept them out. And I think the SEC is saying, we want that level of depth recognized. Because honestly, if you don't make the playoff, the coach after a while is going to get fired. Or as Bill Connolly was saying, down at the bottom end, if you're playing the 9-game conference schedule, that's fewer bowl teams, which also is going to affect job status for coaches who don't make a bowl, because for some programs that's kind of like their level of success. For the SEC, this is not just some sort of like intramural squabble. This is like your employment at stake here, based on how well you do, based on the standards that are in place. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you see such forceful arguing going on about all of this.
Yeah, I think two things here of kind of what you're saying. One, I think there is a big difference and kind of how universities and programs look at and assess their situation between 7-5, 8-4, and 9-3. I think those differences are very huge. Obviously, there's a level of tolerance at different universities of what's okay and what's a desirable and kind of expected win total. Playing that extra game in the SEC again, Georgia and Alabama, that could be very detrimental for your season. I will also say kind of what you said as well, of kind of having that head-to-head and how do you measure that extra game and the conference championship game. Nobody knows that better than me. And in my experience in 2018 and 2019, when we go and play in the SEC championship, and we've been in the top 4 all year long. We play in the SEC championship game and losing a tight one to Alabama. And all of a sudden we're kicked out of the college football playoff. And man, it's a tough pill to swallow. But if you earn kind of that right to play in that game, you have to be able to win those games. But it does suck. Let me tell you, when you go and you play those quote unquote extra games against good opponents and you lose in a tight one, and then you get kicked out of the dance.
No, I think that's totally fair. Let me bring it back to Georgia here for a moment. We talked off the top of the show about the need for improvement along the Georgia offensive line and kind of a spotlight that puts on what we assume Georgia's 2 offensive tackles going to be, Ernest Green and Monroe Freeling. I feel like I know these guys a little bit, certainly know a lot about them. And what I have said, Jake, is, okay, well, if those 2 guys are the hinge point, if Georgia needs to be better and the 2 offensive tackles, assuming they're healthy, which we believe they will be, are going to be kind of what determines the overall success of the unit, then as a Georgia fan, someone who wants the best for Georgia, I feel pretty good about that, because I like the makeup of both those guys. And I think at times when healthy, we've also seen some really good football from both Green and Freeling with the potential to see a lot more. I know you spend a good bit of time around the Georgia program still, at least when you can. How well do you know Ernest Green and Monroe Freeling? And as someone who watches the game in a way that I'm not capable of, how much confidence would you have in either or both of them when healthy to be the kind of bedrock offensive tackles that Georgia needs here this year?
Yeah, I would be lying if I said I know them personally and know their parents. I don't know them, seeing them lift and run and do all the athletic things. Let me tell you, they're freaky. That's exactly who I'd want playing tackle for me if I'm back there taking snaps. I mean, these guys look good and look like an NFL type tackle and a guy that you'd want protecting you. So I think these guys are physically capable of doing whatever they want to do. From a player standpoint, I think it really comes down to me when it comes down to offensive line play. It's just an attitude thing. It's an identity thing, and it takes all five guys really to come together and rally around the idea of, hey, we are going to impose our will. We're going to do what we want to do, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. If we want to run the football, we're going to run the football. If we're going to throw the ball, hey, we're going to protect our guy, and you're just not going to get through us. So that is kind of earned and developed through the summer and definitely through camp and really throughout the season in the way Kirby conducts practices on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, the good on good, and the team run periods, bloody Tuesdays. All those things really tie into the identity and the core of what the offensive line position group is going to look like.
I've got one more issue I want to ask you about here in a moment. Before that, though, let me remind folks, it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. We always love having Jake a part of the program. We're thankful to have Kroger as a part of what we do here each and every week there as well. And as you're enjoying great stuff here this summer, cookouts and parties and getting together at the pool and all the things that we think make summer so much fun. Why don't you try the membership opportunity from Kroger as well to have more time to enjoy this stuff and for the things to go on the grill and in the cooler and the plates and the napkins and everything else that you're already buying at your local Kroger. How about you earn twice the fuel points on those purchases? Check out Kroger.com/boost for more on that. It's Kroger.com/boost. You can try it for 30 days, experience the free grocery delivery, the free pickup. As I said, twice the fuel points on the dollars you're already spending at your local Kroger. So many conveniences, so many features and benefits. Become a Kroger Boost member today. We love having Kroger as a part of DawgNation Daily and our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm. All right, Jake, quick final issue with you, if you don't mind. So for the second time, this time it's allegedly Mark Bowman, the five-star tight end. We're sort of talking about the possibility of a guy out of high school, and this is not confirmed. We don't know, but boy, the rumors are pretty prodigious. Multiple millions of dollars perhaps going the way of a high school recruit. This has impacted a handful of players that Georgia seemingly has recruited over the course of the last year or so. Is that a good thing that a high school guy's getting that much money because finally guys are getting paid? Is that a bad thing because it seems sort of out of balance with whatever fair market value is supposed to be? Is it neither good nor bad and it's just the rules of the game right now? Like, as someone who is a player and at least presumably would kind of be on the side of players at least a little bit, what do you make when you hear about these like outrageous numbers for not quarterbacks, but good players, but not necessarily quarterbacks? Like, what do you make when you hear these crazy figures that get thrown around right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would start off by saying, hey, look, I'm a free market capitalism guy. If that's what the market says, then by all means, pay the guy what the market says. Now, do I also think at the same time that it's a bit crazy and a bit nutty that these guys are getting what they're getting? Yeah, I do. But for your service and your skills, then it is what it is. Do I think it's sustainable, so to speak? No, I don't. I think it's a kind of a bit out of hand at times, but man, I think it's a skill set. It's earned, it is, and someone's willing to pay you that, then I think you have to take advantage of the situation and make as much as you can while you can do that.
Jake, great stuff. I always appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here on our Kroger Fresh Take here today. We certainly hope you enjoy much of the rest of your summer, and we'll look forward to getting a chance to talk to you very soon.
Yeah, Brandon, thank you. See you next week.
Yeah, good stuff there. Jake Fromm, Kroger Fresh Take, there with him. All right, for our golden shoe today, I love when I get to do like the sort of newsman anchor thing, an update on a story we brought you yesterday. So John O'Sullivan is the Florida coach. We talked about the Coastal Carolina coach. Was not happy about O'Sullivan's complaints prior to the Sunday regional final there in Conway, South Carolina. We've also now learned an East Carolina player has given more details on just how bad and sort of unseemly O'Sullivan, the Florida coach, outburst was. Well, now for our golden shoe today, we will give you an update that O'Sullivan has offered an official statement and, frankly, a profuse apology, essentially admitting he was in the wrong. Bad enough this issue was that Florida Athletic Director Scott Strickland has chimed in on this too. Now, listen, all of us have probably said things that we wish we hadn't said. Maybe this is just O'Sullivan's example of that. But because we like making fun of the lousy, stinking Gators, we're going to sort of allow ourselves to have a little bit of a chuckle at this. The Florida baseball coach apologizing for what the Coastal Carolina baseball coach called him out for yesterday. That is our golden shoe for today. How about the lousy, stinking Gators in football? I don't know how many apologies they're issuing, but they probably should. It's been 1,669 days since Florida has beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price promised. You can trust them on all of that. When it comes to compensation, UGA Marine says, I think you're going to see teams go to NFL models where you pay 2 to 4 guys massive money and just hope the rest of the team is good. That model has proven if you don't pay the right guy, you're screwed. He says, I prefer the New England Patriots under Bill Belichick where everybody got paid well and they all won titles. I do think there is an element of, in fantasy sports, you sometimes call this stars and scrubs, that if you ever like fill out like a, especially like a daily fantasy lineup, you see a lot of this where it's like, okay, well, you get to fill out your, like let's say you do this for a golf tournament. A lot of people go stars and scrubs for a golf tournament where they're going to spend a bunch of money on, like, say, Scotty Scheffler, and then they'll just take some long shots to go along with that in the hopes that it all kind of works out. I do think there are some football teams that are going to do that, and that may become the way to do it. But you are right. Whoever you spend big on has got to really pay off for you. And I'm not trying to relitigate the past here, but for Georgia a year ago, they didn't work out. They spent millions on a player that turned out not to be worth it. So there is some risk associated with that. And unfortunately, let's say that NIL goes the way that I think it might, essentially unchecked and uncapped and just, Wild West in perpetuity. What's going to end up happening is, if UGA Marine is right, and I think to a degree probably will be, there are a lot of players who are getting paid more now than they theoretically would get paid in the future. If you think about the contributor, there are a lot of so-called contributors, not All-American, not future first-round draft pick, not five-star freshman, but just a good, solid starter. There are a lot of good, solid starters who, over the course of the last couple of years, who have made a lot of money. I think that's going away. I just do. And this is why, I've always sort of believed that the push for collective bargaining in college football is a little bit of a midwit take, because the various factions that would collectively bargain are so disparate in terms of their actual interests that I don't know that you're ever going to get any real agreement. That, in other words, if it's collective bargaining that ends up benefiting the sort of lower rung of players, then the Arch Manning rung of player can just look at that and say, I'm not a part of this. And like there is precedent for that in sports. Barry Bonds was not a part of the Major League Baseball Players Association. He didn't think he needed it. And if the future, like, collective bargaining kind of favors the lower rung of player, then the higher rung of players who do have outsized value, they just won't participate in it. They just won't be in it. And all of a sudden now you're having to negotiate with them separately outside whatever you collectively bargained with the sort of also ran players. And that's not going to work. That's not going to work very well anyway. PGA Tour is a classic example of this. Part of the reason why LIV and the Saudi Public Investment Fund had such an opportunity to sort of step in and kind of disrupt the golf game, professional golf, is, well, A, they had lots of money themselves, but it also kind of spoke to some of the grievances that the professional golfers had with each other, where in the PGA Tour, the feeling was the small handful of players that probably do have some market value in terms of people coming out to courses or tuning in to watch on TV. I mean, like the on-course earnings for the very best players in the PGA Tour are actually a lot lower than you probably think they are. Guys make a lot of money off endorsements and things like that. But we've had a situation where kind of pre-LIV, the PGA Tour best golfers were not paid nearly as much for their on-course earnings as their, skill level and quality level should have probably suggested. A lot of that money was going to guys like around 125th best in the world. There was more money paid to lesser players, and the best players thought was fair. So, all of this stuff already exists in professional sports as it is. The idea that, collective bargaining in college football is going to create some sort of utopia for the players, I just think that there's ample evidence that's just probably not the case. But there is a certain faction of sort of people, a lot of this is media, they're sort of obsessed with the idea of, the labor implications of some of this kind of stuff, and they just can't shake that obsession, I would say. Let's get a couple more comments here. Brandon Griffin says, unserious teams like USC being able to buy a Brock Bowers-type player is bad for college football. Now, potentially one of the most exciting players in college football might never play a meaningful game. If USC was serious about football, they would spend that money on a bunch of quality four-stars and build an actual team. So I sort of agree with Brandon Griffin on this, but I'm also self-aware. There are plenty of people who think it's great for college football that the next Brock Bowers is not coming to the same place the old Brock Bowers went to. And I say next Brock Bowers in air quotes because I don't believe anybody is the next Brock Bowers. But I do know a lot of people who are smarter than me who think that Bowman's pretty close to a sure thing in terms of being able to be kind of an immediate day one contributor in college football. And that's why his value is as high as it is. He may be the safest prospect in the entire 2026 class, for instance. And that's why he's demanding such a high value. Even after reclassifying, that may be true for him. But we should at least acknowledge that while it is personally frustrating for us when a program like USC that's not close to competing for a championship sort of spends this kind of money just to keep a guy like this from coming to Georgia, there are a lot of non-Georgia people who are like, thank goodness Georgia's not hoarding all the best players anymore. And for the people who've kind of pushed this imposed chaos onto us, this is the reason why they like it. Is because even if USC doesn't do well with Bowman, probably won't, the fact that Georgia doesn't have Bowman opens the door for somebody else to do better in Georgia's wake. That all of this is just, anything in life that's complicated, anything in life that's frustrating is that for a reason. That any system could be improved. If a system is not improved, then you should assume it's functioning as it was designed to function in any area. So the sort of chaos that creates this big spending by USC, it may not actually benefit USC, but in the eyes of a lot of people, there's this thought of, well, at least Georgia didn't get him, which is sort of the purpose of all this anyway. Let's see what else. Bill Camacho also kind of pushing back on the idea that Brock Bowers, that Mark Bowman's another Brock Bowers. I would agree with that, and I'm very thankful that we never quite said that around here. I mean, you can't acknowledge, you can't help but acknowledge the poetry and some of the symmetry. Oh, he's from California. He's this sort of gliding tight end. There's a certain poetry in the symmetry, I would say, but we never, ever said he was the next Brock Bowers because we believe that Brock Bowers is a historic figure. Did I read this right? Did DT go to Nick Bonacani's house, the former 72 Dolphin? How about that? That's really cool. So as a 12-year-old kid, he was in Nick Bonacani's house. Bonacani's one of those guys that always pop in the champagne. I think he's still alive. Pop in the champagne when the 72 Dolphins celebrate the last team to lose, which I kind of like. As a little bit of a minor tradition in the NFL, I kind of like that. I kind of like that. Let me get some YouTube comments. RKD mentioning the possibility that Georgia might lose out on Tyler Atkinson. We shall see. We shall see. By the way, Keith Foltz checking in over here at YouTube. Good to see Keith Foltz showing up over there. Alan Hampton says Brock Bowers is a great athlete, but what set him apart is his heart and mind. He's just different. Yeah, and it's important to know that, when we talk about so-and-so being the next Brock Bowers, we didn't know Brock Bowers was Brock Bowers when he was first coming into Georgia. And some of that may have been because of, how weird California was in the period just prior to Brock's arrival at Georgia. That could very well have something to do with it. Maybe he would have been well known as the player that he was if that not been the case. But go back and rewatch. I think about this all the time. This is one of those things I'd love to hear more talk about, is the Georgia-Clemson game in 2021. This was, a very different vibe around Georgia at the time. Georgia needed that game desperately. Georgia offense did not play well that day. But Brock Bowers was targeted in his very first college game, targeted like 9 times. And I remember watching the game, even though Georgia didn't score an offensive touchdown. I remember watching the game thinking, Brock Bowers is Georgia's best offensive player. Like, he just got here. This is his first game. And he is the focal point of the offense. Like, it was so obvious right away, even though it wasn't, necessarily broadcast very loudly. It was so obvious right away that Bowers was just different. And I'd love to know the impact that Brock made during fall camp for Georgia to say, you know what, for this game that we have to win against a much more accomplished opponent, a point spread favorite, by the way. Clemson was favored over Georgia that day. We're going to build our offensive game plan around this guy that just showed up and is playing his first college game. What an interesting story that is. I don't think that story's been told as well as it could have been. RKD says that tight end at Georgia will be secure for the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that's a really important point, is that one of these days you may feel the effect of not getting Mark Bowman, especially if you also don't get Caden Prothro, which maybe Georgia will get him. Certainly would believe they probably would. But the point is like when you lose out on a Bowman or a Cantwell, there is a chance that you feel the effect of that at some point in time. But that won't be felt for like the next couple of years. And this is, I think people use stories like this when Georgia doesn't get the so-and-so recruit. And because you're seeing a lot of this offseason of, I'm not quite so sure that Georgia's talent level is the same as it always was. Now, I won't pretend to be inside somebody's head knowing why they are saying that, but I suspect it's because they are seeing Georgia lose a couple of these recruiting battles, and I think they assume, well, if they lost this one, they must be losing others of similar, circumstance. And I just think it's important to remember that Georgia's still loaded at tight end, potentially still loaded everywhere. And that while at a certain point you do have to figure out where's your next generation of elite talent coming from, you got to figure that out. I don't think you have to figure it out today. I really don't. I do think you can kind of punt on that concern at least for a little while. I do. We said that after Jackson Cantwell. I think you can say the same thing after Mark Bowman. Let us see what else. Lance D says, considering Georgia's track record in developing tight ends and NFL-ready players, it's hard to conceive they don't get the top guys. NIL is good for players, but it can make them short-sighted long term. Yeah, but I've said this before. Now, as y'all know, I'm a traditionalist. And I am all about the traditionalist argument that NIL is one thing, but NFL can pay you a whole lot more. Like, for those of us who are traditionalists, that's our, like, 10 commandments. That is in our good book. Our 10 commandments is NFL is worth more than NIL, 100%. However, I'm also pragmatic, too, and I have to be honest. I try to be as self-aware and honest as I possibly can be. When you are talking about and look, just to be honest with you, and I don't know what's true, but I have smart people that tell me, which lead me to believe, that you could be talking about guaranteed multi-year contract that pays like multiple millions per year. That's what it could be. Y'all, when you consider to use a economics class word, when you consider the time value of money, if I was, or if my son was, a player in this position, there is a certain monetary reward now that would make me say, I don't care about the NFL. I mean, really, if it is multiple millions guaranteed over multiple years, there is a point in which the NFL doesn't really matter anymore. It really doesn't. And maybe you get that money too, but if you don't, the value of this money now compared to what it would be worth later on, it's some of these deals are so outlandish that it'd be enough for me to say I don't care if my son goes to the NFL or not. It really would be. And now, if you're truly a great player, you're also going to go to the NFL. But the old school notion, which I definitely like as a concept and certainly want to be true of, you need to be thinking about the paycheck that Jalen Walker and Mykel Williams and these guys just got in the NFL. You need to be thinking about that. If it's the alleged money that Jackson Cantwell and Mark Bowman got, and I feel like I have a little more certainty on the Bowman part of this than the Cantwell part. If it's that money, I don't care if I go to the NFL. I really don't. I don't care. It'd be nice. It'd be fun. It'd be fun to keep playing. But if it doesn't happen, if I go to so-and-so school and they don't develop me at all, guess what? At least they paid me. And that's how significant some of this money is. Albert McKinney says, since you guys like crying about NIL, how much Mr. Curtis is getting from Georgia? Do you think it's really funny how offended some people get just by conversation? I don't know that anybody's here is cried about anything. There are conversations. They're going to reflect different viewpoints. They might bring in a different kind of set of facts and data and perspective than perhaps you're comfortable considering. It's amazing how intolerant some people are of that, and how much, how hard they're going to try to like sort of steer the conversation sort of back to their own anger, as opposed to just, I'm glad you're here. It'd be fun to have you participate in it. Participate in the conversation. But it's just amazing how anything that doesn't sort of feel like the world as you understand it, the world as you know it, it's somehow, as you say, crying about it. Listen, there are no tears. There are no tears. Not for me, or I don't think anybody else. G. Grace, going to the Alabama quarterback situation, says, can we give Ty Simpson enough time to operate in the passing game is the question. So I guess, do you think that Ty Simpson is going to be the Alabama starting quarterback for like the full season? I've said before I don't believe that, but I've also said before that I'm not close enough to that situation to know for sure. Let's see what else. Colby Strider says there was a time being a good football player meant you got an education. Then it turned into changing your life in the NFL. Now it's a one-stop shop, and college just means less today. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why, and I talk about this a lot, I know a lot of stuff I say might not make much sense, but this is one of the things I do talk about a lot, which to some people might not make much sense. I think it's really interesting how secretive all of this is. In other words, why not celebrate? I mean, if you're a player that's getting paid that much money, why not brag about it? Or if you're a program that's capable of paying a player that much money, why not brag about it? I mean, there's a world in which you probably should, and yet nobody ever does. And I do think there's something really, really telling about that. And it's sort of hard to kind of go down that road without getting, I don't know, a little preachy and into stuff that we don't always get into. But I do think that part of the reason that college athletics is so popular is because even if it's somewhat of a charade, even if it's somewhat untrue, I think people look at college athletics as the celebration of development. The theory is, and certainly this theory has been challenged by actual events, the theory is that people go off to college to learn how to be an adult. Good luck with that. But that's what the theory is. And college athletics is sort of the best possible embodiment of that ideal, that you go to college to be developed. But if you're getting paid multiple millions of dollars before you arrive at college, if you sign a contract that would pay you that much money before you get to college, then there is a certain assumption that you're already a finished product. And that is where I think the reason why all of this is so secretive, and the reason why people don't talk more about it, is because the presence of this sort of compensation prior to going into college challenges a lot of our assumptions about life. I mean, people like the idea, because it's a tried and true sort of maxim, people like the idea of compensation being connected to labor. And that when compensation comes without labor, think about lottery winners, for instance. You can go, there's been reality TV shows done about this, that compensation apart from labor usually does not end very well. And that's the reason why people are so, I'm not quite so sure about these NIL deals. Fair or not, that's sort of what's going on there. G. Grace on the back to the Bama quarterback thing. So this is what I sort of think is true, because G will remember this. This is the old, before Saban got that run of like Hurts to Tua to Mac to Bryce, that really big quarterback run he went on to finish his career. Prior to that, there was always like the September starter, and then the real guy kind of took over. At least it seemed like they did that kind of a lot. I sort of wonder if this isn't one of those sort of old school, like, if Ty Simpson ends up being Cooper Bateman and the real guy, because I do think that, given Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer, I'm guessing Alabama probably has pretty good quarterback play this year. If I had to guess, they certainly have got a weapon to throw to. But I just don't know that Ty Simpson is that guy. G. Grace challenging the Bowman stuff. G, maybe you're right. I certainly am. I don't necessarily believe anything, but I kind of would believe everything. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm very skeptical about all of this, but I can promise you there are people who are a lot smarter than me, who are a lot closer to it than me. I can tell you they believe it. I can tell you they believe it. That's all I'm here to tell you. That's all I'm here to tell you. There are a lot of people who have a lot more knowledge than I do, which is that's already a pretty long list as it is. When it comes to some of this stuff, I can tell you that they believe it. All right, here on Facebook, just for a few minutes. Facebook comments have been kind of weird lately. I don't know why they don't want to show up. I certainly have a love-hate relationship with the. Here we go. Ken Holcomb says that right now Brock Bowers is the best tight end I've ever seen. We'll see how his career plays in the NFL. Bowers is also one of those guys that kind of transcends the position. I do think that's true. I think that Bowers is an all-time great. And I think that his rookie season in the NFL would lead you to believe that that's all, still very much a possibility. Oh, by the way, Brian Whitaker asked, what about the Braves bringing back Freddie Gonzalez? So, when I heard this, have y'all noticed this? I think we've joked about this before. There is a lot of very fake news on Facebook. I'm talking about, it's really, really fake. I thought this, when I first heard this, I thought this was fake news. I thought this was one of those things that that one of these Facebook accounts put out there of, hey, the Braves are bringing back Freddie Gonzalez. But no, it's really true. He's going to be doing he'll be the third base coach, the former manager coming back to be third base coach, which is kind of interesting, I guess. You hate it for Tuiasosopo, I reckon, been demoted in the program. We always listen to the Braves games. There's the country station up north that always plays the Braves games, just a better signal for us where we live. And one of their advertisers, Tuiasosopo, does those commercials. It's like, what's going to happen to these commercials? I had to say I don't know. But yeah, Freddie Gonzalez coming back. There was a period of time for a couple of weeks where things were kind of looking okay for Atlanta. Now, the only teams in the National League that have a worse record than Atlanta are Colorado and Pittsburgh and I think Miami. Is that right? So the Braves are kind of down there at the bottom of the National League right now. So what I think about this is that I don't know that the difference between Tuiasosopo and Gonzalez as the third base coach is all that stark. I'm guessing it's probably not. There were people who were saying that Tuiasosopo was a causality of way too many guys getting thrown out. To my eyes, it seems like that's probably true. But the fact that the Braves are making a move suggests that they got a pretty problematic situation. Whether the move itself results in much or not, the Braves are acknowledging they are far worse than they were supposed to be. Far worse. And that's true. Jacob O'Neill, I guess some people have said that I've read too many of G. Grace's comments. I'll see if I can find that. Philip Jordan Wells says that that G. Grace must be paying a subscription to BA for all these daily reads. G. Grace does not bother me. I know he drives some of y'all crazy. G. Grace does not bother me. G. Grace, now, I do get irritated anybody that is the whole time arguing, because I don't care if y'all want to argue with each other or not. I'm not here to police that. It's just hard for me to find comments to read when y'all are arguing to each other. That's my only complaint about the arguing, because nobody's ever using bad language or anything like that. My only complaint about the arguing is it gets hard for me to find comments to read, because a comment meant for another commenter does not necessarily play for the larger audience. But I don't dislike G as much as some of y'all wish I do. How about, so this is, by the way, great stuff from Cody. Wait, no, this not.
You want the story behind this photo?
Yeah, please. So this
is from spring training back when it was in Orlando.
Okay.
Freddie got actually pretty angry with me that I took it because, he's in Florida. He doesn't have to wear a helmet, but he is famous for riding his motorcycle into, at the time, Turner Field. And then he would ride it around in Florida with no helmet, but he would always say he'd ride his motorcycle back to his house and kind of decompress after a game. So I took the picture one day, and it worked perfectly when he got fired, and now I guess he's cruising back into Truist Park on his motorcycle.
I do like that. Well, now can you imagine, Cody, first of all, the fact that Florida as a state doesn't think that it's necessary to have a law mandating helmets for motorcycles, and then also thinking, oh, thank goodness now that I'm down here in Florida, I don't have to put this helmet on to protect my skull in the event that I get
with all those old people driving and tourists in Orlando. Yeah,
I don't think I could drive a motorcycle. I just don't think I could, but I can certainly understand why leaving the ballpark. Baseball is a stressful game. I can certainly understand why riding the motorcycle and having the wind in your face, I could imagine that would help you decompress. That part of that does make sense to me.
Yeah, and that sounded great, especially leaving Turner Field. No music, no people calling you. You can't take calls. You just drive home and just kind of let that go. But anyway,
you put out. Well, what else did you put out on X yesterday that I saw?
So David Andrews had his retirement speech, which was really, really good. And I love David because, and I'll scoot over, I guess, a little bit. He was always one of those guys, because he was a Wesleyan guy, we always talked to him when the Patriots are in the Super Bowl. Falcons played the Patriots, and he was always happy to talk to us. His coaches at Wesleyan were always really great, too. So he had a great speech. If you haven't seen it, it's like 8 minutes, and he's just bawling like a baby, but he's a damn good dog. So that was out there. That's on my Twitter as well.
What I like about guys like David Andrews, and there are a few of these guys kind of in sports where, I mean, now listen, in a fight or something like that, I'm sure he could fight his way out of a warehouse if he had to, but just kind of a regular looking guy, you know what I'm saying? Like just sort of a normal guy, regular guy, but became like Tom Brady's center, like Super Bowl champ, New England Patriot. It's interesting to me that for the most part, athletes are sort of superheroes. They look differently than any of us could ever imagine looking. And yet there's also a little bit of space every now and then for the sort of regular looking guy to also have success. And for whatever reason, I find that to be really fun.
Yeah, if he was at the park with his kids, you're not saying, okay, offensive line, because he wasn't that huge and he wasn't expected to kind of take on that role, but he got in there and now he's got multiple rings and pretty good retirement.
I really enjoy those stories. That's really good, Cody. By the way, Brian Whitaker says Terry Pendleton bought him that motorcycle, I believe. They used to ride it together. I did not know that. That's really interesting.
And funny thing about TP, at that same trip, he got mad at me because I had done a video with Chase Elliott where I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. We were driving around AMS. So TP, Terry Pendleton, he yelled at me about he's got to put your seatbelt on, Cody. So just funny little stories.
That's very good stuff. The life of working in TV here and all the sports stuff you see from that. That is certainly very good stuff. G. Grace also says, to read another one of his comments, that South Carolina doesn't have a helmet. You know what? Here's the other thing, too. Here's the code that I think that G. Grace has cracked as far as getting his comments read. And I'm not telling anybody else how to do anything. You can do whatever you want to. G. Grace writes short comments. And I will say, while I'm happy for people to do whatever, my eyes do get drawn to short comments because it's just easy to process them. Because remember, I'm trying to filter stuff as I'm reading here too. It's amazing my ability to kind of do this, if you don't mind me saying. I'm filtering as I'm looking. And so, for instance, Elite GB writes, I still haven't recovered from that Super Bowl. It's super easy to see it. It's easy to process it. It's easy to kind of contextualize it. So part of the reason, if I do end up reading a lot of G. Grace comments, I do have a little bit of bias in favor of short comments. I will be honest. Although if y'all want to write novels, I'm happy to try to sift through those too. But in the immediate, I do probably go to the short comment a little quicker. Matt Rugavina says he keeps it pithy. See, there you go. Matt Rugavina, a pithy comment about keeping it pithy. Name and town if you want to opine. Let's see what else. Scott Wood says, what's your most anticipated home game for this season? Is it Texas? Tennessee's on the road for Georgia this year. I would say it's Alabama. And the reason why is, there's a lot of backstory here, but I'm also very big into, we talked about this the other day. To me, I draw a real line of demarcation between early season and late season games. You want to, if you assume you're going to lose to somebody, and I do think that's a comfortable assumption, I think you want to postpone that loss as long as possible. Now, it gets distasteful late, too. I don't deny that from an emotional standpoint. But early season games are going to be gigantic. My humble wish as a Georgia fan is, can my team just be undefeated on October 1st? If my team is undefeated on October 1st, we could be pretty tough to deal with the rest of the way. As the sort of cliche goes, don't let Georgia get hot. Do not let them get hot. And if they go through undefeated in September, they're going to be hot. So the home game I would circle, I would underline in Sharpie is the Alabama game. For me, that would be the one. Let's get a few more. Although we're not going to go as long as we did yesterday. Brent Clark says, I tell my kids all the time, never tell anyone what irritates you. I do think that's probably pretty good advice. That, I'm not well-versed in philosophy, period. I don't know that I'm necessarily fully bought into the idea of stoicism. I don't know that I'm fully bought into that as a concept. But I do think sort of stoic tendencies are probably pretty good, even if it's not full-fledged. what is it? Seneca? Is that the one? Is it? Who's the Roman one? Is it Marcus Aurelius? Like who's the Roman one of those? I would say that's probably some of those ideas probably pretty good. Yeah, Scott Wood says, I realize when I hit enter, I'm in Alabama. Yeah, I totally understand that. I think it's a really good question, Scott. And my answer to this question is an emphatic Alabama. Now, if all goes well, by the time November gets here and Texas comes, I'll have war paint on it. We'll all be ready to go for that one. But for now, it is. Let's see what else. I made a reference, but I don't think people got the reference that I made. Tim Carter gives you a go dog, Sick'em. All right, a couple more. We're going to go. Spencer Clark says Bobo had the best back shoulder throw of any Georgia quarterback. I think that Mike Bobo is a very underrated player. Now, that's probably going to create another firestorm of conversation. But there are a lot of what might could have been when it comes to Georgia football. I would say the 1995 team is definitely a what might could have been, because Robert Edwards got hurt, Mike Bobo got hurt. A lot of these same players were really good for Georgia in, like, say, 97, year 2 for Donnan, got hurt in 95. That 95 team could have been a lot better. I think that Mike Bobo was an underrated player. Frank Patterson asking about Jeff's report on the new Lucky kid we got. Yeah, Jeff had a story with Carter the other day. I think people like him. He probably needs to put on a couple of pounds, but the honest truth is, Georgia's really good at that sort of thing. Give me a hard-working guy with good genes, family lineage. I will take that any day of the week. You have to have guys like this in the roster. You got to have guys in your roster that you know what you're getting. We joked earlier about, like, sleepless nights. My assumption that Kirby probably doesn't sleep well, period. There are always going to be a few players that cause you to probably lose a little sleep. You better have a bunch of players that don't. You better have a bunch of players who don't. You better have a bunch of players who are like, oh, thank goodness, we don't have to worry about this guy. Like Carter Lucky is the ultimate, we don't have to worry about this guy sort of player. He's going to do his work. He's going to he's going to, handle his business. He's not going to do anything to embarrass us. He's going to do his job. He's just going to come in and be a football player. And maybe he'll make all SEC, or maybe he'll be a solid starter, or maybe whatever else. But you got to have guys that the moment they show up, you put them to work and you don't worry about them. And you got to have guys like that. And in this day and age, they may be more important than ever. And that's what I believe that Carter Lucky, at the very least, is going to be. Colby Starter says, I'm buying a new team flag. What color for this season? I would say that flags look better in red, I believe, because flags are sort of flopping in the wind. Red pops more than anything else. I would say from a flag color standpoint, red probably the best way to go. That would be my answer on that. Ken Holcomb says that Bobo was a good quarterback. He just didn't have the rest of the team around him. Yeah, I would say that's probably true. I'd also say we talked before about, like, the 97 Georgia Tech game being the underrated Larry Munson call. The touchdown, kind of leading touchdown drive, Corey Allen catches the touchdown pass. That's a really fun moment in Georgia's history that probably doesn't get remembered as well as it could. All right, let me do a couple final comments at DawgNation.com, and then we're going to go. Johnny Prescott, shout out to Jack Leo for the great Georgia baseball coverage this year. Yeah, Jack does a great job with that. Jack also went on our DawgNation cruise this year. I thought he did a great job on the cruise. I don't know if I'm for the most part, we don't really talk about. I'll let people have their private life. Jack's also getting married right now. That's why Jack's not around right now. He's getting married. I think that's okay to probably say. But yeah, so Jack's a great guy. Garrison Tucker says, let's get a prediction of the top target on 3rd and 5 or more. Can I give you 3? because, look, if we're talking about third medium, I think guys like Noah Thomas and Colby Young are going to be big parts of that discussion. Now, if it's 3rd and 10, that's a little bit different. Third and medium, stuff like that, I think the big body receivers like Thomas and Young are going to be huge. And I'm also growing to believe, speaking of Lucky's, that Lawson Lucky could be a big part of that as well. UJ Marine says you never see a motorcycle parked outside of a therapist's office. That's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. Johnny Prescott, very funny. Let us see what else. Anything else before we go? All right, we're going to get ready to wrap up here. Good stuff, everybody. Appreciate all your stuff. Really fun comments. SEM Dog, by the way, says it's amazing how different the offseason conversation is now from 30, 40 years ago. Used to be dominated by fears over injuries and grades. Not so much these days. Yeah, I can't remember the last time we talked about grades. It's been a minute. But listen, it changes a lot. It's going to change a lot in the future, but it still remains very fun for sure. Hey, fun stuff here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on that, including getting your air conditioning. I feel like it's been kind of a mild start to summer, but don't let that fool you. Extreme heat is on the way. And when it does, you want to make sure your AC unit is ready. So check out rsandrews.com for more on that. Have a great day. We're back tomorrow. By the way, find them online, rsandrews.com. That is rsandrews.com. Find them online there at rsandrews.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.